Thank you to everyone joining us on Zoom. We are currently streaming to Facebook Live, and we are now ready. So Councilmember, please go ahead and open us up.
All right, well, welcome everyone to our District 10 Community Office Hours. I am Johnny Camus. I'm your council member, at least for the next 3 weeks. And my staff is usually standing by here. We got Adrian and Shane Patrick Conley, my chief of staff. We're all standing by for questions. And if you have any, please put them in the comments if you're on Facebook. And if you're on Zoom, enter in the Q&A section. Now I'm going to update you on some announcements first our newsletter came out, and it was filled with our resources for upcoming virtual meetings and a lot of great resources as usual. And if you don't subscribe to our newsletter, please visit District 10 newsletter at sjd10.com. So it actually is going a lot of great information. So let's talk about transportation for a little bit. The Branham Lane land swap has been officially completed after working on this for almost 6 years now. The county has relinquished a portion of land, a strip of land along Branham Lane, along Marshall Cottle Park between Snell and Vista Park. Now that area has been very, very dangerous to drivers. Had more than 160 accidents in the last 10 years, several fatalities. And it's because people race to get ahead of one another when the lanes go from two lanes in each direction to 1 lane in each direction. And so the plans are to expand it to 2 lanes in each direction and put a stoplight. Now we will be putting a stoplight soon. We had enough money to do that on Kingston Park. But the actual lane is going to take a little while and a little more money. We also had the Meridian bike lane and paving project has been postponed until 2021, unfortunately. So we'll have to be, residents of District 10 will have to be putting up with the bumpy road along Meridian, unfortunately. The Almaden Expressway in 85, I know it's in District 9, but so many people have asked about this Caltrans area, and it was cleaned up last Monday. And I hope it stays clean, and I doubt it will, but there were 14 homeless individuals that we found shelter for, and 2 insisted on staying. So and then we don't have the right to remove them, and neither does Caltrans. Unfortunately, they will be there. And pavement work is still continues for the next couple of weeks, and on the pocket between 87 and 85, Marshall Cottle Park area and Branham Lane. All this should be completed by the 10th. On to a project that I started working with with faith communities, business and nonprofits, government entities, and it's called a poverty pandemic. And what we've brought these people together is to help create jobs for people who've been displaced. There's a lot of people who've been displaced from the hospitality sector, the travel sector, and a lot of them are unfortunately losing their homes, needing a lot of assistance. And I know that the government can't solve everything by itself. So by putting this group together, we've worked with many of these groups, including like Work to Future, for example. And a lot of the churches around here are pitching in to help find jobs. And we're collecting donations to help people pay their rent. So if you'd like to learn more about this project, please look into my newsletter, and there'll be an update about that in every newsletter until I leave office. So we need all of us to do our part. There's lots of things you could do. You could be generous to your waiters. You could you can make a donation, and if you have the ability to hire an employee, there's ways that you can hire somebody and have the first 8 weeks paid for by government if you would give somebody a chance. So learn more about that on my website and the newsletter. And on the park updates, Sycamore Grove at Almaden Lake, although I've seen a lot of work starting with a paved trail, it looks like the targeted completion is going to be the second quarter of 2021, unfortunately. But I hope Matt Mahan will have me on hand for the ribbon cutting of that new trail in the Sycamore Grove. This is the new extension that my office worked very hard to attain over the years. That is just north of the Almaden Lake on Almaden Expressway side. Marshall Cottle Park, the community garden, is complete, and so you can get online and book your get on the waiting list for a spot to farm on this new spot. I will be going out there to do a very small ribbon cutting. A virtual one soon. Another news, that we've been working in my office and a lot of nonprofits, including the Rotary Club, have been working on something called the Community Play Garden at Almaden Lake. And what we're trying to do is create a tot lot that is an all-inclusive tot lot. Now we've won $700,000 from the county in a matching grant, and we are trying to make it a big project. Now that 1.3 million is going to help us create a small project and replace the tot lot that's there. But we'd like it to make a grand project, and so we're working with the Rotary Club to fundraise another $3.7 million to make it a beautiful project. That's something that we can all be proud of it in the Almaden. I know a lot of us pitched in for the Welcome to Almaden sign. A lot of us pitched in when we were painting the walls and cleaning up the median with our beautiful day projects. And I'm asking all of you to pitch in to create a beautiful all-inclusive playground right here in Almaden. So you can log on to the Almaden Rotary's website to learn more, the Rotary Club Playgarden website, and please make your donations. So before I introduce our today's guests, I wanted to give you a little bit of background. After we fought kind of to stop the bulldozing, basically, of Bret Hart and Leland to create workforce housing, I looked for ways that we could find workforce housing without, basically raising taxes and a whole lot of disruptions to the community. So, we came upon this in discussions with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. We came upon CalCHA Housing in our discussions. And I love this program so much that I've already introduced a memo that we're going to be voting on today to move this idea forward. And this meeting will happen at the Rules Committee meeting at 2 p.m. And I think my staff is going to put up information on how you can access the meeting. I'd love for you, especially those of you who fought hard to keep Bret Hart and Leland open, to log on and help us create a voice around this project after you listen to what's happening today. So be sure to tune in today, actually right now, and then later, if you agree with me, please log in. And even if you do disagree with me, please log in and have your opinion heard at the Rules Committee meeting later. So now I'm going to have one of my staff members introduce Jordan Moss of CalCHA Housing, and Adrian, can you go ahead and introduce our special guest?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Council Member. I will be welcoming Jordan Moss, and his bio is, over the past 2 decades, Jordan has been actively engaged in the investment, acquisition, development, financing, and management of more than $3 billion of institutional multifamily transactions. Jordan founded Catalyst Housing Group in 2015 to combat rising income inequality and address the related middle-income housing crisis. An active real estate technology investor/advisor, Jordan more recently launched the Catalyst Innovation Lab, which focuses on incubating, piloting, and scaling innovative solutions, tools, and partnerships that drive operating margins, building efficiencies and portfolios sustainably across the Catalyst portfolio and throughout the multifamily sector. Jordan formed the nonprofit Essential Housing Fund in 2020 to A, subsidize rents for public school teachers, B, develop additional middle-income ownership models outside of California, and C, furthering diversity and inclusion efforts within the multifamily industry. Welcome, Jordan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So Jordan, why don't you tell us a little bit about, what you do, and then we'll get to some questions. I'll give you a few minutes to explain what you do to help get workforce housing into cities.
I'm happy to. Thank you for having me. I do have a quick presentation if I can go ahead and share my screen. Is that okay on your end?
Absolutely. Let's do that. Okay. Adrian, can you make that possible?
I've got it on this end. I just need to get it up here. Everybody see this okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again for having me. We are Catalyst Housing Group, as was mentioned. Happy to be here and very excited about this afternoon's conversation in front of the Rules Committee. I'll just try to touch on a few things quickly about us, leave plenty of time for Q&A. We like to say that Catalyst lives at the intersection of housing, innovation, and impact, as was touched on in the bio, between Catalyst Housing Group, between the Essential Housing Fund, between the Catalyst Innovation Lab. We're doing lots of things in all three of those categories. The way we got started here was, first of all, I've spent 20 years in the housing industry doing everything in and around the institutional multifamily business. Catalyst was founded in the beginning of 2015 to focus exclusively on affordable housing. And out of the gates, like many, we were focused on more traditional capital A affordable housing using tax credits and private activity bonds. And as we're touching on here, there were two primary takeaways there. We just felt that that model was not necessarily scalable given the scale of the housing crisis in California. And we were also continually disappointed at the inability to service the middle income demographic that Councilmember Camus is talking about here. We have nurses, teachers, first responders who earn in excess of traditional affordable housing limits, yet don't make enough to live anywhere near where they work within their community. As we say here, the proper functioning of our cities really hinges on adequately and affordably housing this middle income workforce. It's probably no surprise to anyone here that the largest super commuting regions in this country are all in California, between Stockton, Modesto, the Inland Empire. It's clear what's happening. People just drive and drive and drive till they find somewhere affordable to live. And in the meantime, we touch on some of the ripple effects here from congestion, pollution, crime, health issues, and on and on and on. It's really an unsustainable situation. So our response was that we put a working group together consisting of government officials, attorneys, consultants, housing experts, really focused on how to connect the dots on building a more scalable capital model that was not reliant upon subsidies or tax credits or private activity bonds or lots of the other stuff that generally goes into a traditional affordable housing transaction, and how to also do so to address the middle income. And the culmination of these efforts was the launching of CalCHA, the California Community Housing Agency. CalCHA is the first ever joint powers authority focused solely on the creation, production, preservation of middle income housing throughout the state. And today, our company Catalyst partners with CalCHA on a whole host of fronts. We have conversations with cities like the one we're having today to secure additional membership in CalCHA. We go out and identify acquisition or development opportunities. We oversee due diligence, financing, legal, closing, provide all of the transactional capital that's needed to do this. And then once CalCHA acquires assets, we serve as their asset manager and have accounting and reporting responsibilities on a long-term basis. So what's unique about this model, what's very different than traditional housing of any sort, is governmental ownership. And so it's CalCHA itself who is directly taking title to these assets. And by doing so, there's two pretty magical things that happen here. The first is that CalCHA is exempt from property taxation on everything that they own as a governmental entity. Property tax exemptions are common in the affordable housing space. So, this is not unusual, but it's a lot cleaner and easier than the traditional tax exemptions in the more traditional affordable housing world. And secondarily, I mentioned we don't utilize any subsidies or tax credits or anything else. We are 100% self-financed through the sale of CalCHA issued governmental revenue bonds. So CalCHA as a government entity can issue bonds. They're backed by the project revenues and they finance 100% of the cost of this program without any cost to the city. It's a very scalable model. we're not relying upon outside equity investors. As I mentioned, no tax credits, no private activity bonds, which is really important because there's a limited pool of bonds available for traditional affordable housing. And we really want to see those used for truly low income, extremely low income, homeless related sources of housing, as opposed to being utilized in our model. This touches on the tax exemption. As I mentioned, it's a lot cleaner than the traditional welfare exemption and more traditional affordable housing. From an affordability standpoint, when we talk about the missing middle, we're really talking about households who earn generally between 60 and 120% of median income. The traditional affordable housing models utilizing tax credits and private activity bonds allow you to address housing up to 60% of median income. And there's been plenty of market rate capital to address high-end, high-cost housing for people who generally earn about 120% of median income and above. But the reason we have terms like the missing middle is there have been no subsidies or motivations of any kind within this 60 to 120% AMI category. It's really important to note that we are very focused on protecting the tenants here. Our regulatory agreements, there's a couple of unique things that are included there. We do not displace any of the existing residents to the extent that we buy an existing market rate asset and convert it to this form of affordable housing. Everyone can stay as long as they like. We don't force anyone out. When they move on their own accord, we backfill with people who meet our parameters. And the other thing is we have inserted a 4% cap on annual rental increases, which is well inside of traditional affordable housing limits, as well as state level rent control legislation. And this is probably one of the most important slides here. From a public benefit standpoint, it's probably obvious that we create an immediate public benefit through the creation of these desperately needed middle income housing units for all of the households and the essential workers who live there. But on a long-term basis, 100% of the financial upside of this program is actually granted to the underlying jurisdiction. In this case, it would be the city of San Jose, should we gain approvals and be able to acquire assets there. And if you think about the value of these assets on a long-term basis and the value of the embedded equity and the long-term cash flow and the control of the property, all of which is granted to the city, it's really our intent and our goal to create tens of billions of dollars of public benefit across the state here that will hopefully all be reinvested into additional forms of affordable housing. This is what we're hopefully voting on later today at Rules Committee, is to actually send this program to the full council. Council ultimately, would need to vote to join CalCHA to support our ability to issue bonds locally and to accept the surplus economics. But other than that, it's actually a relatively simple and single resolution that needs to occur here. And just to remind everyone once again, at no cost to the city and then no involvement really from city staff, so they can focus on some of those lower income and homeless related issues that we talked about earlier. On the bond side of things, we're creating no liability for municipalities here. The city does not credit enhance or backstop these bonds in any way. We're not diminishing the city's issuing capacity. As we talked about, we're not utilizing the scarce resources that are available for traditional affordable housing, and there's no subsidy required. Today, there are 18 cities, counties, and housing authorities who are members of CalCHA. We should be at more than 20 by the end of the week. We've been unanimously approved in every jurisdiction to date, so not one dissenting vote has been received. We're pretty excited about that. And then I won't spend too much time here, but this talks about our management style, well communities, which is something we've patented, which refers to work, engage, and live local. This is the first property that we acquired back in April of 2019. You can see these are pretty nice, large, new, modern assets. This was a $173.5 million acquisition, 390 units in Santa Rosa. We then acquired Verdant in the city of Fairfield, $108 million, 286 units. Serenity at Larkspur in the city of Larkspur, which is in Marin County, for $222.5 million at the beginning of this year, just before we all began sheltering in place. The Arbors is in Livermore. We acquired this in August, 162 units. Really proud of this one because this was an older, smaller, more value add like asset where we've been able to protect all of the in-place tenants at the same time that we're investing a significant amount of capital and providing a ton of affordability. This is our next asset that will close. This should have closed already. There's a unique set of circumstances we won't get into here, but this is in the city of Dublin, nicest, newest asset in Dublin, 313 units, 163 million. It'll close in the first quarter. And just to tease this out a little bit, We're already under agreement for a significant property in San Jose that we hope to close in Q1, assuming we get approvals in the near future. It's in District 4. You know, I can't disclose too much, but I put here it's larger than $300 million, larger than 500 units. We generally set aside at least a third of our units for low-income housing, below 80% of AMI, which in this case, you know, assuming it's 500 units, it's actually larger than that, but that would be 150 units or greater, and the balance would all be for moderate income households below 120% of AMI. This talks about the future. We're getting into new construction, teacher housing, a bunch of additional things here. I won't go into too much detail on the Essential Housing Fund. I will note, you know, we're pretty proud that we have a program where we're subsidizing rental rates for public school teachers at our property in Larkspur, and we hope to expand upon that in 2021 and beyond. We talked a bit about the Innovation Lab, our advisory board. I would encourage everyone to visit catalysthousing.com /advisors to take a look at the housers who have committed their careers to affordable housing, well-respected names in California and beyond who have all joined our efforts here. And this is where you can find us, catalysthousing.com, calcha.org, or Allison at catalysthousing.com, who is our head of governmental affairs and is on the call today. So sorry to be long-winded. I will stop sharing there and happy to address any questions that anybody has.
Thank you, Jordan, and thank you for that great presentation. And you know, a lot of people will think, wow, what's the catch? You know, what happens if, for example, your renters lose their jobs and all of a sudden they can't pay their rent? What happens to these bonds? What happens to the project?
So these projects are backed solely, or the bonds, I should say, are backed solely by the project revenues. So, you know, we sell these bonds ultimately to some of the largest investors around, PIMCO, Invesco, Nuveen, American Century, names that are sort of household names in the financial industry. And so, you know, what's really elegant about this solution is that the city, as we've touched on a couple of times, is taking really no risk at all here. You know, it's the bondholders who are solely at risk. These are people who, you know, have made a career in underwriting assets like this, understanding markets, and are obviously making a big bet on the ability of these properties to perform long term. And generally, I would say if you look at the loss rates in the affordable housing space over a significant amount of time, it's probably no surprise that they're, you know, much lower than market rate housing. It's unfortunate socially that we have as deep of a housing crisis as we do, but there's obviously overwhelming demand for this type of housing out there.
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, you know, there was a huge outcry for teachers, and so much so that the San Jose Unified School District was looking for ways to develop properties that they own, and a couple right here in District 10 caused a huge uprising. So when you talk about, I know you got into a lot of slides that flew by quickly, some of the information. You know, what happens to these assets after the bonds are paid off? What you know, there's still buildings, right? And so, and there's still people living in them. So what happened? I mean, 30 years is a long time, but you know, or 15 years or 30 years is a long time. But what happens to these assets?
Yeah, that's the most exciting part of the program, I would say, on a long-term basis. You know, normal housing, the way it works is there's an equity investor, they buy an asset for some price. Years down the road, it's worth some other price, and whatever the amount of appreciation is goes to that equity investor. What's unique about this model is the only capital that's utilized here is from the sale of these bonds that we're talking about. And as a debt investor, you know, back to these investors who are buying these bonds, all they're entitled to is the return of their principal plus, you know, a small coupon. And we've been able to generate a relatively, you know, low cost of capital for these bonds. So we're talking, you know, mid 3% range today. And so what that means is that over time, if you think about the appreciation that has generally occurred in California, you know, since the beginning of time, if you think about what these assets will be worth 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road, when all of this financing has been paid off, all of that equity that's embedded in these properties, the long-term cash flow, the control of the asset, the control of the affordability, all of that is granted to the city to do whatever they would like. And to make this even more flexible, we understand that a lot of cities are not really set up to directly be an asset owner, nor do they always want the liability of being an asset owner. But we give the city the ability to assign their option agreement to, say a nonprofit housing group, or if they wanted, they could sell the asset and keep all of the sales proceeds and reinvest it into other things, whether those are housing related issues or not. But there's a ton of upside and flexibility for the city here. And I think when we all look back on this program in the future, I think what we'll be most proud of is that we will actually have proven to have created billions and billions of dollars of public benefit in this way. And our hope is that it all is being directly reinvested into other forms of housing across the state.
And without raising taxes, which is something that astounded me. I mean, every time you hear from anybody in government, we need more money, we need your money, we need money to build or create shelter. You're not asking us for any money, are you?
No, that's exactly right. It's interesting when we have our introductory calls with cities, we have a lot of conversations like this, and it feels like people are always waiting for the ask, right? Well, hey, this will all work if you give us, $100,000 a unit in subsidy or whatever it may be, because it sounds like you've been on the receiving end of those calls for many years. But that is the really elegant part of this model, as you said. We're not raising taxes, we're not using city subsidy dollars, we're not even using other subsidy dollars that are available on a state or federal level, because again, we'd love to see those go to other forms of lower income affordable housing. We're really self-financed.
Well, that is great. Now there are some downsides to this. There's got to be some downsides. I think you scraped a little bit upon it, but I want to be clear to everybody that it's not taxpayers are going to be slightly on the hook because because the bonds are tax-free, there's no property taxes being paid by the development, right? And so that basically government's gonna have a little bit less dollars coming in from whatever projects that, whatever the project is that you're doing. Is that correct?
That's definitely correct. I would say if you wanted to look at it as a downside, I would definitely, counter what I'm about to say with the creation of the public benefits, both the housing that's desperately needed and is immediately created through this program, that may be slightly less tangible, right? If you think about what is the value to a school district who sees 20% annual turnover in their staff because no one can afford to live anywhere near the school, what is the value to them of the immediate creation of units targeting teachers near their district so that they can actually, get off the roads and stop commuting for hours and hours a day, right? That's slightly less tangible to the city. But again, back to this concept of having fully functioning communities on a long-term basis, if you look at the out-migration patterns of California, it's all of these folks in the middle who are leaving. On the ends of the spectrums, people either can't do much about their situation, unfortunately, or they just stay here and pay the sting tax to remain in California. But it's in the middle that we're losing the essential workforce, where the immediate creation of these units is desperately needed. And on a long-term basis, if you look at the upside that is created for the city, if you wanted to compare that to the loss of tax revenues, and if you wanted to think of that as sort of a return on investment, if you will, the numbers are fairly staggering. We run these numbers for cities all the time, and it's not uncommon to see 100 or 200x return on the loss of tax dollars. And I would remind everybody, the tax dollars that are being lost are the city's share of the property tax revenues. And we deal with cities across the state. I would say on average, we generally see that cities capture about 8 to 10 or 12% of the tax revenues. And so if you really take, an existing tax base on an asset that we may acquire, if you look at the total property taxes, the share that goes to the city, and compare that against the value creation, there's a reason this has been unanimously approved in 18, soon to be 20 plus jurisdictions, because people come to the conclusion pretty quickly that the upside massively outweighs, what we have been calling the downside.
I think you better have that and available some calculation to show later on at 2:00, because that is very. You talked about 70 and 120 AMI. Let's explain. Let's get down. I mean, this is all housing jargon, if you will. The common man doesn't understand what AMI is, and what is 70 of it, and what is 120 of it. Can you go a little explain what it is and who gets to be in these buildings and how do they qualify?
Sure. So sorry for glossing over some of that. I live in housing jargon day in, day out. So apologies. AMI stands for Area Median Income, and it is set by HUD, our Housing and Urban Development, office at a national level, and it is set on a county by county basis. So essentially, HUD is looking at the entirety of a county. In this case, it would be Santa Clara County, and they're looking at the median income. And so they generally publish these numbers based on an assumed 4-person household. We adjust those numbers up and down depending upon the actual size of a household and depending upon whether we're talking about a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom, a 3-bedroom unit. The net takeaway is if you just think about market rate rents today, for your median income household, we are providing an opportunity to live directly within the community, closer to your employment at a well below market cost, rather than jumping in the car, every day and commuting for hours and hours and creating congestion and pollution and, carbon emissions and on and on and on. So hopefully that better explains it. I think I forgot the second half of your question. I'm sorry about that. You're muted.
Sorry, the dog was barking. I was asking, so how do you qualify? How does someone get in line to take part? And then, after this, we're going to go, I'm getting a ton of questions here. So we're going to go to questions live after that you answer. How do you get in once you buy this? And how does a person who's a teacher, for example, get in? Do you advertise or what happens?
So we definitely advertise like any other apartment owner would. If anyone on this Zoom has rented an apartment before, I'm sure they're familiar with apartments.com and all of the other sort of listing services where you would go to, even Craigslist to find an apartment. We definitely advertise there. Additionally, we do some direct outreach to people like teachers, like you're talking about, to school districts to let them know that this is available. We look to partner with them, hospital systems, et cetera. And so, generally, people are able to find us. We're always looking to get better and to get this in front of more people. And as far as qualifying people, that happens at the asset level. So people show up and we say, are the bands of income, depending upon the size of your household, are sort of from here to here. And we qualify people and provide them with the appropriate rent discount. And as you move to questions, I think I'm going to close the blinds here and I'll be right back to you.
Okay. Adrian, are we ready to take questions live, or are you ready? Did you want to read off questions? And
yeah, we are totally ready. So first up, we have a question from Donna Castillo. So Donna, when you're ready, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, this is Donna. Good morning. Quick question. So are you just taking existing buildings, or do you plan on doing any new builds that's going to apply for this missing middle, which it sounds like a great program. I'm just wondering.
Thank you. To date, we have only acquired existing assets and converted them. Okay. The reason we've been focusing there is because this was a fairly novel concept a couple of years ago. We wanted to prove that it worked at scale before we added the additional risk of construction. Now that we've proven that, we're actually very focused on new construction. And we hope to actually sign up our first development deal, which happens to be in Santa Clara County, not in the city of San Jose. But we also, I think we'll hear at the Rules Committee meeting today from one development partner of ours who is in front of an opportunity to build literally thousands of units in San Jose that we could capitalize should we gain approvals. And so we're very focused on new construction. I would say our view is that the housing crisis will ultimately be solved by adding more housing. We think that's the only answer. And so as proud as we are of what we have done to date, we definitely want to be a part of the solution in building net new units as well.
Amazing. Thank you.
You bet.
All right. Thank you.
Pardon?
And just a quick reminder that if you have any questions, please put them in the Zoom Q&A or in the chat and in Facebook in the comments section. We do have more questions, so I will read the next one. The next one is from Mahmoud, and he is asking about the management of the properties developed. How is the management operated? And is that carried out by a separate NGO, or how is that done, especially once the bond expires? How is the property managed?
So there's multiple layers of management here, depending upon exactly what anyone means by that term. I would mention CalCHA, starting at the sort of upper level, is a joint powers authority, a government entity. It has an elected board that oversees its activities, and it has staff, which is local here. They're based in Walnut Creek, who has served as staff to housing-related governmental entities like this for the last 30 plus years. At the property level, it starts with the on-site property manager. So we have partnered with the largest property management company on earth, Greystar, as well as with FPI, who I think is like the third largest in the country. And depending upon the asset and the location, we have generally been using one of those two groups to handle the day-to-day property management. Our company, Catalyst, then serves as the asset manager. So we oversee the day-to-day operations of the property manager. We have ongoing accounting and reporting responsibilities, continuing disclosure responsibilities to bondholders, and then we ultimately report up to CalCHA and to their staff and to their board. As far as the second half of the question about what happens over time, it's really up to the city. Again, we've tried to build this as flexibly as possible. San Jose is a huge city, has tons of resources. Potentially at some point down the road, the city determines it wants to directly take title to these assets. There's a conversation to be had there around whether any city wants the liability of being an asset owner. One of the things we deliver today is that they get all of the benefits of this without having that liability. But the flexibility exists there for the city to assign, this option to, as I mentioned before, a nonprofit housing developer who has in-house property management, or to sell the property or do, any other host of things that they see fit. So it's really up to the city on a long-term basis. We don't want to be in the business of directing a city, as what to do or how to manage a property or what affordability levels to provide or anything like that.
Great, thank you. We have another question from the public, and this one is probably requiring a mix of answers from the council member and from Jordan. This question asks, if this solution existed, why did we need Measure E?
Well, I could tell you that I didn't know about it when Measure E was put on the ballot. I only found out about it about a year ago, which, that's well after we decided to put the thing on the ballot. I was searching, but and actually Measure E, while I didn't support it, is going to hopefully go to very low income housing needs. Now that I hope that this thing passes, so that we can house a lot more homeless with that money rather than spend it on, people who are teachers or what have you, the workforce housing. And by the way, the city of San Jose hasn't built any workforce housing for many years, and so there's no one helping teachers, and there's no one helping that level of income folks at all. Jordan, do you have anything to add to that?
I don't. I think you nailed it. Thank you.
Yeah. Which brings me to the point, like, how far down do you go? Could somebody working at Home Depot making $18 an hour afford to live in one of your units?
It's a complicated question because for starters, every county is different. So the AMI levels are different. The market rate rents are different at every property. If you're sort of focused on that low income category to 80% of AMI, it then begs the question, does this person have roommates? Is it a single person looking for a studio? Everything here is based on the size of the unit, the household income, how many people make up that household. But generally, when we talk about the essential middle income workforce, and we talk about nurses, teachers, first responders, civil servants, et cetera, that sort of captures, I think, generally who we're talking about here.
Okay. Adrian, next question, if you have it.
Yeah, another question from the public, and this is similar to what you touched on about, what's the catch? They're asking who opposes this and why?
Well, I know that we've had some resistance from staff because I don't think that they understand the product, although they've been in discussions for 3 years, I think with this agency, unbeknownst to many of the council members, in fact. the staff is fearful of what do they call newspaper risk? Like I hope you don't mind me saying this, but if Jordan runs off with a couple $1 million and hits the road, we're gonna be stuck holding the hey, we let them do business in San Jose card. So embarrassment risk is one thing that's being discussed. One thing that it's just I think staff is uncertain because I think this is a fairly new idea. It's only been around for how long? 3 years, Jordan?
Our first closing, CalCHA was formally created in January of 19. We were working on this prior to the creation. Our first closing was in April of 19. So I would call it a couple of years old.
Yeah. And I've talked to staff and people are saying, well, maybe this only works in small cities, because most of the cities Jordan's been dealing with are smaller, and somehow big cities are different. And I don't see that that's an argument at all, but that's what staff is talking about. How big is the biggest city that you deal with, Jordan, outside of San Jose?
Well, for starters, there's 18 cities, counties, and housing authorities that are already members. I'm not sure who the largest would be. There's plenty throughout the Bay Area. Hayward, Dublin, they're relatively decent sized cities. I mean, if you're talking about a city the size of San Jose, you don't have too many rivals throughout the state or across the country. The question comes up, why have we been focused on the cities we've been focused on? The first answer is we've been fairly reactionary based on where opportunities to acquire assets have been. And so when we've seen those opportunities, we've run off to those cities. And luckily, I would say we've generally been welcomed with open arms. People are generally thankful, that we spent years of our lives and a significant amount of money creating this structure that has now proven to really work at scale. I think one of the answers as to why we've had more immediate success in smaller cities compared to larger cities is probably evidenced by the 3 years of discussions that we've already had around this in San Jose and what we continually face today. Obviously, large cities are organized differently than some of their smaller.
Are you saying we're more bureaucratic somehow?
I didn't say that. If you want to say that, But I think, the important takeaway, I think, is I mentioned before, but we have been unanimously approved in every jurisdiction. Again, people are generally thankful and fairly blown away by, how unique and thoughtful and flexible this structure is. We have not received one dissenting vote today. I think if people wanted to sit around and hypothesize until the end of time around theoretical risks to a city, because someone, as you said, newspaper risk, right? Someone can write an article that X, Y, or Z happened. I suppose you could let perfect become the enemy of good and look for those pitfalls and look for problems that don't exist. But generally, I would say the housing crisis is so severe throughout the state, and cities are so desperately desiring below market housing for these essential middle income workers that they realize, that the tangible and obvious upside here, combined with the obvious lack of liability or commitment of resources at a local level, far outweighs whatever someone could dream up as a potential or hypothetical risk to a city.
Agreed. I think I see a question, Adrian, from Mahmoud.
I see the same one, yeah.
Go ahead.
Mahmoud is asking, could this be a rent-to-own type of property?
I'm happy you asked that. We're actually really excited about that. And I mentioned really quickly that we were focused on teacher housing. I won't go into a whole lot of detail there, but there's a lot of school districts who own land today. Our pitch to them has been, it'd be great if they were able to keep the land and ground lease it to us for $1 a year. We would fully capitalize the cost of construction of teacher housing, for example, on their lands. And that as these bonds are repaid and the asset is now free and clear and we give it back to the district, they could cancel that ground lease, own it fee simple. And since this would still be a relatively new property, this could happen as soon as 10 or 15 years post-construction, it would be up to them, but they could literally sell these units to the folks that are already living there at their cost basis, which is ultimately going to be nothing. So we're just on the front end of this. I don't want to over promise and say that we have already cracked the code on this. And ultimately, it's really up to the municipality that inherits these assets down the road as to what they want to do with them. Because during our ownership, we have the obligation to keep these as rental properties such that we can pay off the bonds. But we really do hope that we can develop that type of rent to own model in the middle income space that we have never seen before, not only throughout the state, but really across the country.
Well, that's exciting that you're looking at that. This is a new enough product where I think that you should, most people would be focused on getting this across the finish line before you start thinking about expanding the mission. But I'm glad you're thinking about it, because that's another thing that keeps me up at night. If everybody's a renter, nobody's an owner, nobody has ownership of their community. And so I'm all in favor of making sure that people have a stake in the communities that they live in. And so I'd love that to be a bigger discussion in the future. Any other questions, Adrian?
Yeah, we had a quick one from Donna, and she was asking, is this similar to a program that Stanford University does that you know of?
My understanding with Stanford, I definitely am not an expert, but what I have seen is that they have just directly gone out and acquired existing assets. They clearly have a significant endowment that allows them to do so. They also have a significant need for housing for faculty and staff because of the cost of living anywhere, near their campus. And so that's what I have seen to date. And given that they are a government entity, they also qualify for a property tax exemption, which I think is partially how they make the math work. But when you have an endowment that's the size of theirs, if you determine that you need teacher housing, you can just go out and stroke a check and buy it, and it's not that big of a deal. Unfortunately, cities don't have an endowment the size of a Stanford or Harvard or Yale or some of these other schools.
Yeah, thank you. And okay, we have one other question, and this question asks that the city has promoted ADUs as affordable housing. Is the city funding any other missing middle housing solutions?
So we're not funding ADUs. ADUs are, so the permitting process has been made easier. And I could tell you that even though we've made it easier, it's still not easy for some. But we're not funding ADUs as yet. We are not doing any workforce housing. We have built a lot of supportive housing. It's mostly downtown. And we have a few very low income projects that are, how should I say, permitted, but are not under construction yet. We actually have one right behind Whole Foods that I approved about 3-4 years ago that we still don't have a shovel in the ground yet. We also have a very large project on Blossom Hill Road at the VTA station on Blossom Hill Road on Blossom Hill Avenue, where they meet. And that is also in the approval stages. That'll be 100 units of low income housing and very low income housing. But nobody's talking about this type of housing, which is workforce housing or AMI, 80 to 120 of AMI, which one, like I said, the Blossom Hill project might get to that level. But that's many, many years away. The beauty about this is, Jordan, is how fast can you get up and running?
Well, we've been closing transactions in less than 60 days. And really the only thing that has to happen is that a municipality needs to be on board before we can do that, because we obviously can't go tie up properties and put deposit money at risk and perform all of our due diligence and have all of that be sort of hinging on potentially getting approvals from a city down the road. And so once we have approvals and there's a clear path, We pretty aggressively hunt for opportunities within that municipality. As I mentioned, more specific to San Jose, we already have agreement on something that, fingers crossed, if we're able to gain approvals in the near future, something significant that we could close in the first quarter to make this tangible. But we move really quickly.
That's fantastic. That I could tell you that has bothered me for a long time, because it often the construction of low-income housing is usually at least 40 to 50% or more higher than the construction of market rate housing, and that bothered me since I came into office. This actually takes advantage of some cost savings, because these are already built projects, and in the end, I think it's going to be a win-win-win situation. I hope that all of you could join us this afternoon, and please help our colleagues make this a reality by calling on their offices and calling our mayor and calling our housing department. Let them make this. It's for me. If you read the newsletter, I feel like it's a win-win-win with very little risk to our city. In the end, the people that are benefiting are our school teachers, the people who support us every day in our lives, and we need to do something for them without raising our taxes and our cost of living here, driving ourselves out of the area. So thank you, Jordan, for joining us today. I'm very proud of what you're doing, and I hope that we win this afternoon. Okay.
Thank you so much. I hope so too.
All right. We'll see you later. And let me get back to our conversation here about our next meetings and what have you. So let's see, join me on Thursday, December 10th at 6:30 p.m. for a community conversation with VTA as we learn about how they plan to maintain services in the coming months. I know there's been a lot of talk about cutting bus lines here. And also on Saturday, December 12th at 10 a.m. for an interactive farewell conversation between myself and Mayor Sam Liccardo. My staff will send out these links, and please do register for these conversations. To submit questions in advance of these meetings, email us at D10, that's District 10, full word district, and then number 10 at sanjoseca.gov. So, and don't forget to check out the newsletter and the website at sjd10.com. Thank you for joining us here today, and I look forward to our last few meetings together. It's been a pleasure serving our community, and have a good day.